Hello everyone, my name is Preston Dennett and thank you for joining me for a new episode of UFOs and the Paranormal. Today I'm going to be talking about my favorite type of UFO encounter, and that is an onboard UFO experience. These types of encounters actually contain all different types of UFO encounters: sightings, landings, face-to-face encounters with humanoids, and of course going inside an extraterrestrial craft. The title of today's episode is 5 Incredible Onboard UFO Encounters. These cases are, of course, very controversial. Skeptics do not like them, but the fact is there are so many of them. The evidence for them is overwhelming. I have no doubt that this is happening all over the world. There are so many cases. And what's interesting is these are the kinds of cases that really hold the most information, really have the potential to answer all of the questions we have surrounding this subject. Who are these visitors to our planet? Where do they come from? Why are they here? And so forth. So I've got 5 cases today which are really interesting and unusual because each of them is very extensive. The witnesses were able to hold fairly long conversations with the ETs and got all kinds of information about them. So these 5 cases range from 1970 to 2008, coming from a number of different locations on our planet, including Spain, Ukraine, Poland, also Brazil, and one in the United States, specifically Wisconsin. A couple of these are multiple witness cases. In every single one of these cases, these people were affected profoundly, physically, emotionally, and so forth. So yeah, these are really astonishing cases. And I think it behooves everyone to take these kinds of cases seriously, if only for the fact that there are so many of them. Each of them do contain details that corroborate each other, and each contain unique details as well, as we shall see. But let's just start with our first case, which I call Time Doesn't Exist. This is not a very well-known case, but very extensive. This occurred sometime in April 1970 in Madison, Wisconsin. The witness is anonymous, as a lot of people who have this experience elect to be. But his case, I think, is an important one because he got so much information. It's really an amazing case. This case comes from Warren Smith. He first wrote about it in the May 1973 issue of Saga magazine under the pseudonym Eric Norman, but later published it in his book, The Book of Encounters. The witness is a small-town lawyer. He's anonymous, but uses the pseudonym Raymond Shearer. He was 32 years old at the time of his encounter, and when it occurred, he had just held a late-night meeting with a client at a restaurant in Madison, Wisconsin. It was after midnight. This was one evening in April 1970 as he drove out of Madison, and he was about 20 miles out of town when he noticed a strange light hovering above the highway ahead of him. He assumed it was just a helicopter and didn't really pay much attention to it, but as he drove under it, he did notice that his car radio filled with static, the car itself began to heat up, and he also developed a sort of instant headache. He slowed down, grabbed a bottle of aspirin from the glove compartment and took 2 of them, and just kept driving. He was about 10 miles from his house when, for some reason, as he says, I don't know why, he slammed on the brakes and turned off on a dead-end remote gravel road. There were no structures on this road. And driving down it, he came over a hill and had to slam on his brakes. He actually skidded to a stop about 15 feet from a large, disc-shaped craft sitting in the center of the road. You could see it had a row of lights, kind of glowed with a blue-green color. Immediately, his car engine died, his headlights and dash lights went out, and his radio stopped playing. He was very scared. As Raymond says, I started to whimper and cry. I was scared to death, because this was something I didn't know about. I remember trying to snap down the locks on the doors of the car. I saw some shadowy forms walking towards the car. Then I must have blanked out. The next thing Raymond knew, he was driving home. The sun was just coming up. For some reason, it didn't quite dawn on him that he had experienced hours of missing time, and really at first all he could recall was seeing this initial bright light above the highway. Arriving home, he still had a headache. He lay down on the couch, and although he was tired, he couldn't sleep because he kept hearing the strange rattling sound. Finally, his wife woke up and began fixing breakfast, and this is when Raymond noticed a welt on the back of his neck, just above the spinal cord. And by noon, it had, quote, blistered up. He said it was very sore and painful, so he went to the doctor, who was very puzzled by the appearance of small perforations on Raymond's skin where this welt was. And as Raymond says, he said it was the strangest thing he had ever seen. He put some salve on it. The welt gradually went away. But following this, Raymond's personality experienced a big change. He became nervous and anxious. He began neglecting his law practice. And instead, weirdly, he found himself becoming obsessed with politics. He had no idea why. As Raymond says, it seemed important for me to get into politics. I was never interested in political office before that time. Things soon became worse. His headaches continued. He began to argue with his wife and his law partner, and it got so bad that finally his father convinced him to go visit a psychiatrist. Several weeks of therapy seemed to make no progress, but then the psychiatrist decided to try hypnosis to find the reason for Raymond's anxiety. And it worked. This broke down the wall of amnesia, and Raymond immediately began having flashbacks of this light over the highway, the craft in the road. Both the doctor and the patient were absolutely shocked to find out that the UFOs were the cause of Raymond's anxiety. So his first impulse was to go buy a bunch of UFO books and magazines and read up on this subject, but the doctor advised against it, told him not to do this, and instead the doctor educated himself about the UFO subject, and only then did they continue the hypnosis sessions. And using hypnosis, this entire onboard experience was revealed. Under hypnosis, Raymond recalled seeing this craft on the road in front of him and the car stalling. He saw a figure appear at the driver's side, and as Raymond says, I didn't get much more than a glimpse of him. He looked at me for a second. There was a blinding flash. Then I opened the door and stepped out. He could see that this man was holding a strange instrument up to his neck, told him not to be alarmed, that it wouldn't hurt, but would help him to talk to them. He felt a strange tingle over his body, and as he says, I felt funny for a minute. Then the fear seemed to leave me. My hands stopped trembling. My head cleared up. I wasn't so confused. A warm feeling came over my body, and I felt these people were my friends. So Raymond now saw that there were 5 figures, 3 of which were collecting samples of sticks and plants and other things from the ground and putting them in boxes. As Raymond says, they worked very fast. They seemed to be picking up as many different types of things as they could. He noticed that one of the figures stood guard, while the other, who was holding the instrument up to his neck, seemed to be in charge. He says these figures looked largely human, but sort of reminded him of ancient Egyptians. He said they had long, flattish faces, slanted eyes, very thin lips, more like a slit than a regular mouth, he said, and very light-colored skin. He said they were about 5 to 5.5 feet tall, but had very strong bodies, larger chests than most humans. They all wore coveralls and helmets. He said they never blinked, and as he said, when they looked at me, they stared straight into my eyes. Very unusual eyes, he said. Now Raymond could see that the craft looked like metallic aluminum and was, he estimates, about 100 to 125 feet in diameter. It was resting on tripod landing gear. It was saucer-shaped. It had what looked like an antenna in the rear. And while the beings were collecting specimens, Raymond did look at his watch and saw that it was 1:47 in the morning. Now seeing this, the leader asked him what type of time he used. Raymond began to explain the concept of days, months, and years, and the being's reply was that humans needed to learn how to handle time correctly. He said that time as we know it doesn't exist, and that they, the ETs, have the ability to distort time, speed it up, slow it down, or even stop it. At this point, the leader put his hand on Raymond's shoulder and led him to the craft. He saw that there was a ladder leading up into this craft, and shaking, Raymond was told to go inside, which he did. Inside the craft, he was amazed to see that it looked much bigger on the inside than the outside. He said it was very cold inside and quite uncomfortable. So then they had him hold a strange metal rod and stand in front of this blank screen and explain that they were recording his vitals, his body temperature, his brain waves, his weight, his height, and other data about him. He said that the people inside the UFO, quote, seemed like pretty nice people, but he wondered if he would survive this experience. The unusualness of this experience and the environment around him was causing him all kinds of anxiety. As he says, I didn't feel right while I was in there because everything was different. There was something funny about the ship. I couldn't feel or hear the sound of my feet when I walked around. This sort of made me feel like the ship was a ghost or something, but it was definitely metal. He saw that there were very few furnishings other than some chairs and what looked like desks, all of which were made out of the same material as the craft. He did see other strange computer-like machines. The leader said that these machines were used to guide the craft. He saw no windows or portholes. This confused him, but the leader said that they used screens to see outside, and then told him that they were able to maneuver their craft using Earth's gravitational field, and could use gravity to draw them towards the planet or repel them away from it, using a form of anti-gravity, and actually told him that scientists on Earth were getting very close to developing and understanding this. They explained that they came from another galaxy. They told him all kinds of things. They said water has an energy in it that we don't fully understand. They explained that they can use energy to render their ships invisible. They said that many different types of ETs are visiting Earth and that others visit more often than they themselves do. They said their mission was a scientific expedition to determine the characteristics of planet Earth. And he said that humans are very violent and have actually been very hostile towards them, and that they have on occasion lost some of their crew to conflicts with humans. And he said that while humans are advanced in some areas, they are very backwards in other areas. And he said that humans are not ready for the ETs to reveal themselves to humanity. At one point, they put a cone-like device on Raymond's head, which they said would give him great knowledge. This turned out to be the most unpleasant part of his experience for him. He said he felt a great pressure in his head and felt almost as though his brain was being scrambled. As he says, it was the most painful thing I've ever experienced. At one point, they told him that he should get into politics, as they needed a friend in politics. And they told him that they would meet again. Finally, they took him off the craft. Raymond asked them for a memento or a souvenir, and they did not respond, but told him to remain in his car until the craft took off. The ET returned into the craft, the ladder retracted, the craft made a loud buzzing noise and took off at a diagonal, taking about 30 seconds to disappear. Immediately, Raymond's car started up, his lights came back on, and he drove off. Now, Raymond has not reported any further contacts, or if he did, he's not talking about them, but he did say that he feels there is probably still more to the experience than he can at this point remember. But he absolutely believes it did happen and that the hypnotic recall is accurate. As he says, I know now that it was real. I felt the metal on that ladder. These people are real because they squeezed me on the arm. I believe that someday, somewhere, we will meet again. Raymond agreed to come forward with his story, only on the promise of complete anonymity, but he felt it was important. As he says, I want the material to be published, but I don't want to be exposed as a UFO nut. I would lose my entire practice if this came out. Now, the researcher, Warren Smith, says that he was given full access to the hypnosis tapes and doctor's notes, and Raymond himself says he still considers a career in politics, but has not yet done so. I think you'll agree that was a very extensive encounter. The witness learned all kinds of information, and while he did find it quite frightening, overall it was a benevolent experience. He did not believe that these ETs were hostile in any way, and as you can see, it did affect him very profoundly, changed his life completely. It was very difficult for him initially, and like many, many witnesses, he kept quiet for quite some time. I like the case also because it was thoroughly researched, has doctor reports. He did go under hypnosis, but again, recalled much of this, without the aid of hypnosis, including, this initial sighting and the landing. But most of the onboard experience, of course, was recovered under hypnosis. This is not always the case. For example, this next case was fully conscious. And this is a truly interesting and unusual case. There's not a lot like this in the UFO literature. I call this next one, We Are Your Friends. This occurred on February 28, 1974 in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. It is a single witness case. The witness did allow his first name to be used. It was thoroughly researched. But this one has some of the most unusual details of any case I've ever heard. This very unusual onboard encounter was first investigated by researcher Fernando Cleto Nunes Pereira and was later re-researched by Irene Granchi. They both interviewed the witness firsthand, and the witness's name is Durant Melo Ferraz. He was born in 1956, and he was 18 years old when his encounter occurred. He said it was 7:30 p.m. on February 28, 1974. He was alone in the kitchen of his home, his family's home, when without warning, he found himself, as he says, somewhere else. He found himself in this squarish room, color of smoked glass. There were no doors or windows, a cone-shaped ceiling above him. He immediately heard a voice speaking in his native language of Portuguese, and it said, "Stay calm. We are your friends." He now realized that this voice was coming from a flickering, box-like device in the corner of the room. At this point, he saw that the watch he was wearing had stopped working and read 7:31 p.m. Suddenly, without warning, an opening appeared on the blank wall, and he says a very large egg-shaped device moved towards him. It was the same smoky glass color as the room he was in, and at the same moment the object came towards him, a yellow beam of light shone down on him from the cone-shaped ceiling, and this voice again repeated for Durant to remain calm. And to his utter shock, a human figure stepped out from this egg-shaped object and revealed itself to be Durant's double. Twin of himself, looked just like him. Now the voice from the box instructed him to touch the man before him, which he did, verifying that this was a flesh and blood human being, or at least looked like one. Durant's twin patted him on the back and said, "Keep calm, wish me a good journey, for I do not intend to harm anybody." At that point, the twin walked through the wall, and on the wall Durant could now see a screen, and to his amazement, it showed his twin, now in his own home, apparently impersonating him. Durant was allowed to see his twin's interactions with the people around him. Now those who knew Durant could see he was behaving differently. He was normally a very friendly and affectionate person, whereas this twin was not quite the same way. He behaved very gruffly towards Durant's sister and also to the driver who came to pick up Durant and drive him to his family's company where he worked at that time. So this twin seemed to be ignorant of social interactions and behaviors, at least to some degree. He did not know how to handle money or fill out an invoice. So intensely curious, as you can imagine, about what was happening, Durant asked out loud, "What do you want with me?" And a voice replied, "We need to conclude some tests. We do not harm anybody. The less you say about this, the better. However, we should like to make it known that we are friendly and only wish to help." So he asked, "Who are you? What is your world like?" And the answer was, "We cannot tell you who we are. Our world is different from yours." So he continued to ask questions, asking if they were planning to invade Earth, to which a voice replied, "We are not invaders. We work for the good of the human race." Durant asked why he had been chosen, and they said, "You are different from others and have feelings similar to our own." He asked about food, and they said he will not feel hungry. He did ask them, do they know the existence of God? And the answer was, clearly so, of course. He is everywhere. Everybody knows him. So still asking questions, he asked about this twin and was told that he was actually one of the ETs. So he's still on the craft, and while he was on there, this voice told him that it was his duty to assist his twin functioning on Earth. And Durant found that by looking through the screen at his twin, he could not only see his twin, but look through his eyes. On occasion, though, the screen was turned off, and this left Durant ignorant of what his double was doing. And as it turned out, this double was showing all kinds of unusual characteristics. He seemed to be very concerned about plants and trees, even mending the limb of a broken tree, but seemed to treat those around him roughly and with ill manners. So all this time, Durant was still in the same room. He saw that it did have a shelf, a small bed, but no pillows or blankets. It was fixed to the wall. There was also a small, movable stool. So the temperature of the room was normal. He noticed that although he spent many hours in there, he never felt tired or hungry. He wasn't sure how long he was in there, but it appeared to be at least one full day. Now when the screen went dark, he became bored, and at one point he wished he had something to read, and immediately the small shelf glowed red around the edges, and a newspaper, a couple of books, and an issue of Spider-Man appeared on the shelf. Now Durant later learned that this issue of Spider-Man had not even been released yet. On another occasion he felt lonely for his girlfriend. The shelf glowed again, and he was given a letter from her, which had apparently just arrived at his home. So he did lay down a few times on this little bed, but never slept. He never ate or went to the bathroom. And suddenly he found himself back in his kitchen, and it was exactly 24 hours later. His watch, which had stopped, immediately started working again, and speaking with his family, he learned that they had been very puzzled by his gruff behavior over the last 24 hours. It's not clear in the report whether or not he told his family about his experience, but he did inquire about his twin's behavior and learned some interesting things. It turned out that his twin had taken a taxi and in the back seat had found a lady's handbag which had been left there, and he returned it to the owner. So Durant followed up on this and learned that yes, this had in fact happened. He learned that one of his coworkers was shocked when his twin appeared behind him as though walking through the wall. He learned that his twin had spent some time reading Durant's own books about Brazilian history, science, geography, several newspapers. He was seen collecting flowers, leaves, and taking pictures of Rio de Janeiro, which he apparently took with him back into the craft. Durant did agree to be interviewed, saying, quote, "People will not believe my story, but I would like you to publish this statement of theirs. We are friends and only wish to help." Now when Irene Granchi interviewed him later, he did agree to be interviewed, but told her that he now just wanted to forget about the experience. Irene says her impression of him was that he was, quote, "cordial and polite." He did confirm all the details reported by the previous investigator, Fernando Cleito Nunes Pereira, but Durant said that he now has no interest in speaking about the encounter. How crazy is that? Imagine being taken on board a craft and seeing what amounts to your twin, your double. You know, that is unusual, certainly, but it's not unique. I do know of a number of other cases where people have had this sort of experience. It's hard to say exactly what's going on here, but certainly fascinating. This case is also very interesting because, like the others, he did get a lot of information and was able to hold conversations. and also felt ultimately that this was a positive experience, though, as I said, currently he doesn't want to talk about it, just wants to forget about it and lead a normal life. But kudos to him for going public, allowing his real name to be used, and subjecting himself to the research from professional investigators. So there's a lot to unpack with all of these cases, and I think it's a really fascinating account. Now I'd like to move to the next one. This is another single witness case where the person who had this experience did elect to remain anonymous, but finally did come forward, said he only wanted his story published after he passed away, which I think is kind of interesting. But I call this one, The People of Earth Aren't Ready. This one occurred on December 25, 1976 in Merida, Spain. And like the other cases, this was very difficult, quite traumatic for the witness, pretty scary. Ultimately, he decided, no, this was not a negative experience. Though, yeah, it was really quite unusual, and he had a difficult time processing it. It did affect him physically, as we see in all of these cases. And it's such an extensive case. The messages he received are just so fascinating. I think you'll find it a really interesting case. This case comes from researcher Pedro Maria Fernandez and was published in his Spanish-language book, Los Visitantes Desconocidos, The Unknown Visitors. The witness is known only by his initials, F.A., he's a fine arts professor, and he agreed to have his story told again only after he passed away. He was born in 1930. I'll just call him Francisco. This is a pseudonym. He was 49 years old at the time of his encounter. It was the morning of December 12, 1976, as Francisco and two of his students were walking near the Madrid-Caceres Railway outside of Merida, Spain, and they were out hunting birds. Suddenly, they came upon a very thick patch of fog. It was weird because it seemed to be rectangular in shape, 300 feet long, 6 feet high, and was situated among some olive trees. And no sooner did they notice this wall of fog when it advanced towards them and enveloped them. And it was so thick they could barely see each other, even though they stood right next to each other. So they were unnerved by this, and they walked out of it, and suddenly they broke free of this fog, back into the sunlight. But all of them felt it was strange, and they talked about it until around noon, at which point the boys departed for home. Francisco continued walking, and suddenly felt real tired and lay down next to a tree. He said tiredness just completely overcame him, and he fell instantly asleep. Now, at one point, sometime later, he opened his eyes and was puzzled to see darkness surrounding him, but he was too tired to wake up. That is until he felt this strong pain in his shoulder. Now, coming fully awake, he saw that it was in fact nighttime, and he was shocked to see this tentacle-like appendage gripping his arm. He got up and tried to free himself. He dropped his gun, found out he could only walk a few feet, and reaching down to grab this appendage, he said it felt weird, spongy, flexible, smooth. Looking around him, he saw a light to his right and saw that this appendage was coming from a dark, egg-shaped object in a horizontal position. It was 120 feet long, 45 feet high, and standing next to it, he saw the silhouette of a tall, slender figure. So this thing that was holding his arm was attached to this object. Thoroughly frightened, he felt a very sharp pain in his chest and passed out. Upon awakening, he could hardly believe his eyes. He was in a large room, lying down on a kind of stretcher, and what he first thought was a hospital room. He said the room was completely silent, the temperature was comfortable. He saw weird lights, strange-looking alien instruments around him. One of these devices looked like a large, kind of a compass, with weird symbols on it, and it began to emit noise, which sounded to Francisco like voices speaking a foreign language. Then it became quiet, and suddenly colored lights began flashing in the room. So Francisco called out to see if there was anybody in this room, and this is when he heard a voice speaking in Spanish. "Stay calm. We'll go see you now. Don't be scared, stay calm. So Francisco was still wondering if he might be in a hospital, but about 8 minutes later, a door slid open and 3 figures entered the room. He assumed at first these would be human doctors, but they clearly were not human. So he now realized that he wasn't in a hospital, that he must be inside this spacecraft. These 3 beings, he said, looked humanoid. They were just over 5 feet tall, identical in appearance, but they had hairless heads, a very tall forehead, a long, large nose, thick lips with the top lip being bigger than the bottom, and they had large protruding egg-shaped eyes. He never once saw them blink. He said their skin was scaled like a reptile. Each was wearing tight-fitting, shiny, silky-looking gray jumpsuits. So understandably, Francisco became quite nervous. Then that all changed when one of the beings began to speak to him in a very kind manner. They surrounded him on the stretcher and began to examine him, touching him on the head, face, and chest. They appeared to take his pulse. One of them took a device from the wall and placed it on his chest. He said it was heavy and had a small screen on the front of it. So this exam was quite brief, after which Francisco started to ask questions. He first asked why the beings had taken him and where they come from, and were they going to take him away. They said no, he was free to choose what he wanted to do, but that they had needed to do this physical exam. They said that they were responsible for the strange fog he had seen early that morning, and that they examined him at that time. They said that their ship was made to travel specifically to Earth, but came from a larger mothership, which was big enough to block the light from the sun. They said it could travel at great speed, and it took them only a few hours to travel from where they came from to Earth. They said that their own galaxy was flaring up, requiring them to look for a new place to live. At this point, they gave him a tour of the craft. They took him to a room which contained various plants that they were growing. They said that they had mixed these plants with others to enhance their vitamin content. They said their culture was much older than human culture. At one point, they gave him something to eat, a type of marmalade. They gave him a red liquid and a hot broth, and told him that this would provide enough nutrition to last a full day. They told him actually that his heart had failed, and that was the reason they had taken him on board and revived him. They said that they were, quote, beings of light and benevolent in character. They told him that humans were not benevolent, and that if humans attempted to destroy their own planet, they would prevent this. They told him that the compass-like device was artificial intelligence and controlled the ship, that it was an intelligent computer. The ETs said that they had learned our language by tapping into our own radio transmissions. At one point, Francisco asked them, why don't you teach what you know to the planet? And instead of the ETs responding, the compass-like device replied and said, the people of Earth aren't ready to receive us yet. If we do, we would trigger a warlike action, which would require us to respond and cause the deaths of many innocent people. We are looking for a way to access your planet peacefully. You must serve as a messenger, transmitting what we have told you. They told him that when he heard 3 beeping tones, that would be the time for him to reveal his story. The ETs then spoke and told him that the compass-like device actually prevented them from committing any warlike behaviors on their part, and would actually self-destruct if they, the ETs, exhibited any warlike behavior. They told Francisco that they had placed a device in his body which would facilitate their ability to contact him again. At one point, he did look out the window and saw stars and what appeared to be another planet. At one point, the room became dark and then lit up again, and the ETs said that there had been something above them that necessitated them hiding their presence from it. So they said that since he had now recovered from his apparent heart attack when he fainted outside the craft, he would be returned. They took him outside of the craft and put him back next to this tree. Saw it was still dark outside. They returned into the craft, which promptly rose upward, still maintaining a horizontal position. It now made a sound, he said, like buzzing bees, rose about 12 feet up, tilted diagonally, and took off at such great speed it became a point of light in the sky and was gone. He tried to check the time, but discovered that his watch had stopped. He was dazed and disoriented, so he hiked back into town. By the time he got there, dawn was breaking. His family expressed alarm and concern that he had not returned and chided him for not informing them that he was staying out all night. But he was too tired and dazed to speak about what happened to him. He skipped breakfast, went directly to bed. His family woke him up around 2 p.m. Immediately, Francisco stood up, screamed, and collapsed. So they rushed him to the hospital, and doctors had a hard time diagnosing him. They first thought he might be suffering from gout, but further examination revealed that he had a weak heart. So while he was in the hospital, he actually slipped into a coma for 3 days, and then promptly woke up. Doctors performed x-rays, which did reveal a, quote, foreign body in his chest. Also, one in the big toe of his right foot. The doctors told him that they planned to remove this object inside his chest the next day, but right before the operation, they x-rayed him again, and this foreign body was gone. They did do an operation on his toe and found this small object, as Francisco says. They extracted a small object resembling a pellet. They asked me if I knew its origin. I said I didn't. Then 2 men came and, very astonished, took it away. Francisco later learned that one of these was an American. He asked for information about this object, but despite repeated requests, it was never returned and he was never told anything about it. Doctors did tell him that his body showed evidence of radioactive contamination. Francisco also noticed a mark on his arm where this thing had grabbed him. But, he says, for the next 5 years, he suffered from undiagnosed illness that actually left him unable to work. Doctors asked him repeatedly if he had any idea what might be wrong with him, but Francisco professed ignorance and refused to tell them about his UFO encounter. At one point, they gave him an EEG, which showed abnormal readings to a degree that for a while it gave him the impression that his brain was inactive, which obviously was not accurate. So his health suffered. He exhibited vision problems, mild diabetes, rheumatism. He had another heart attack. The mark on his arm, which was normally pink, would sometimes become purplish. And whenever this happened, Francisco noticed a pattern. This was when his health problems would become exacerbated. So doctors continued to ask him about the cause of his illness, saying, "If you could help us by telling us what really happened to you, perhaps we could help you more effectively." But still, he refused to divulge his UFO encounter. Finally, he did hear those strange beeping noises, and this is when he contacted researcher Pedro Maria Fernandez. And Francisco told Pedro, "That's why I called you." So Francisco was at first very tight-lipped about what had happened to him, but later revealed the whole story to the investigator. Pedro conducted an extensive interview with him, which he later published in his book, The Unknown Visitors. So there you go, another very extensive onboard experience where the witness was able to hold long conversations with these apparent extraterrestrials. Really so interesting because the details he received from them are details that appear in so many different cases. Many ETs have said, we humans are simply not ready for open official contact because of our warlike ways. Primarily, that's the reason. But so interesting. Makes me wonder how many people out there never talk about these experiences because there's such a hostile climate of skepticism and ridicule out there. I suspect most people do keep silent. Here's another case. I like this case a lot. It's a multiple witness case. Super interesting. These witnesses were able to, again, hold long conversations, got some very, very interesting information from the ETs. I call this one the most important attribute of matter. This one occurred on September 20, 1979 in the small town of Sztum, Poland. And yeah, a multiple witness case. One of the witnesses was a scientist, so he was able, I think, to asked some really interesting questions of the ETs. Both actually asked questions and got answers as well. And it being a multiple witness case always adds a level of credibility, and also sort of corroborating their experience is another encounter that occurred in this same exact area 1 year earlier. So yeah, I think you'll find this one particularly interesting. This case was thoroughly investigated by Polish MUFON representative Emilio Popik and was published in the August 1980 issue of the MUFON Journal. It was also researched by others. This is a very interesting double witness, fully conscious case of an onboard UFO encounter. It occurred around 9 p.m. on September 20, 1979. The two witnesses were Miroslav Góralski, he's an electronics engineer, and his friend Krzysztof Kobus, he's a theater instructor. They were working in Miroslav's garden at his home, located not far from Sienkiewicza Street in Sztum, Poland. At the time of the encounter, Miroslav was rinsing off his shovel, and Krzysztof had stepped into the garden gazebo to light a cigarette. And this is when suddenly Miroslav heard a strange sound, and at the same time felt an alarming pressure and almost a choking sound in his throat. Looking up, he saw this silver metallic, kind of delta-shaped craft floating at very low elevation above him, and his first thought was that it was an airplane about to crash, and he screamed out, threw himself to the ground, and covered his head with this shovel to protect himself from what he was sure was going to be an explosion. Now at the same time, Krzysztof heard Miroslav yelling and came running out to see what was wrong, and to his shock, he saw his friend lying on the ground, and above him was a large object surrounded by what looked to him like a ring of thick white fire, and it was slowly coming lower and lower down. At this point, the environment suddenly became deathly quiet, and this object lowered to a height of about 20 feet, they estimate, overhead. They could now see that it was shaped kind of like two triangles facing each other, with the bases facing each other, and the apexes at opposite ends. This was connected by a structure shaped kind of like a plus sign. You can see their drawing here. It was silver gray, about 60 feet long, bigger than their entire garden. But at this point, the object began to spin in place around its axis and now took on the form of a disc-shaped craft. Miroslav got up from the ground, and together the two men stepped closer and looked up at this object. At this point, it became very bright, and both men immediately heard, quote, a terrifying and unbearable high frequency. It was sort of echoing in their heads, they said, and at the same time they found themselves illuminated by the light from this craft and immediately engulfed by a sort of dense, milky, pink-white fog. Both men found themselves unable to move. Miroslav said he had had the shovel in his hand, but now it was gone. Now at this point, Miroslav said all his fear just left him and was replaced by an almost euphoric feeling. He felt a strong force pressing down on him, and this was followed by the sensation of going up an elevator at very high speed. Krzysztof said that at this point his legs began shaking. He felt this strange force taking over his body. He looked over at Miroslav and saw that his face was distorted and his knees were bent as if under the force of great gravity, and suddenly he realized that he was in a different place, no longer in the garden, but inside this sort of foggy realm, and that there were three cuboid or prismatic forms appearing around him. He actually leaned on them and felt that they were solid but had a soft surface. And suddenly he felt almost like he was sitting in a comfortable armchair. And as soon as he did so, he started to receive telepathic communications. All of these images entered his mind. He said they were various formulas, equations, and symbols that appeared to be about mathematics, physics, and chemistry. He said it felt as though his mind had been taken over, and he said he was, quote, totally petrified. Meanwhile, Miroslav says that the strange force surrounding him had dissipated, and he realized he had been taken inside this craft, but still saw the same weird fog around him. and he was very curious, so he began asking questions. He said, "Who are you?" There was no response. He said, "What do you represent?" Still no answer. Now, being an electronics engineer, he asked, "What do you know about integrated circuits, transistors, semiconductors?" This time the answer came back. They said only one word, which was nothing. So he persisted with his questions, asking them, "What do you know about matter, or what is matter?" And the answer was, "You are insightful. The most important attribute of matter is its ability to pervade other matter." So meanwhile, Christoph still felt as if he was sitting in this type of armchair, but now instead of formulas and symbols and equations entering his head, he said he saw a succession of various colors flooding his mind: red, black, blue, yellow, others, and finally gray. He said it felt almost as if his head was a computer, as thoughts and ideas flowed into his mind from some external source. At one point he looked down to see what he was sitting on and was surprised to see nothing there. He seemed to be levitating or floating. And like Miroslav, he did start asking questions, but they were answered not by words, but by visual images. He said at one point he saw people in various old-fashioned clothes and costumes from throughout ancient history. He looked over at Miroslav at one point and watched him turn and lean out of this foggy area at a steep angle, as if leaning out of a window to watch something. So Miroslav says that after asking about the state of matter, the ETs asked him a question, saying, "What is this?" And this is when Miroslav leaned forward, exactly as Christoph had described, leaned through the fog outside, and saw a screen showing an image of his hometown Sztum from above. He could see the layout of the city, the main street, the lakes around it, and he answered the question saying, "This is a city housing estate." And the next thing he knew, he was abruptly deposited back into his garden, dropping almost a foot to the ground. At the same moment, Christoph felt as if the invisible chair he was sitting on had been pulled out from beneath him, and he promptly fell on his bottom and rolled onto his back, finding himself lying down in the garden. Both men immediately stood up, absolutely astonished, and saw the lights from this craft rapidly receding to the north. So they stayed at the location until morning, talking about what had happened to them. The next day they did tell their friends, but were not taken seriously. Both men said that afterwards they suffered from headaches. Finally, looking for help, they contacted researchers and were subjected to numerous tests, both physical and psychological, from a number of professionals. They were found to be sane, intelligent, stable, and honest. They did later agree to go under hypnosis, which did not reveal any new details except for one tiny bit of information. They remembered being shown some strange symbols. Investigators were absolutely convinced of the veracity of this case. One reason was because 1 year and 2 weeks earlier, in 1979, there was another remarkable UFO event in this same small town of Sztum. At the time, there were 3 ambulance workers, Dr. Barbara Piazza, the driver Grzegorz Skosinski, and the stretcher bearer Andrzej Olejczuk. They had just left the Sztum hospital for the home of Elżbieta Pluta in the nearby town of Zutowka. She was in labor. So on the way there, Dr. Barbara Piazza pointed out a big red sphere in the sky and said, "What would that be?" One of the men joked and said, "It's the notorious UFO." This was a joke. They all laughed. They picked up their patient and headed back towards Sztum. But as they passed the town of Kalwa heading towards Sztum, they saw that this object was not only still there, it was larger and getting closer and lower in the sky. Before long, they saw it was at treetop level, about 600 feet ahead of them. Now Grzegorz, who was driving, accelerated the ambulance and said that it was now pacing their vehicle. And as Dr. Piazza says, "It seemed obvious to me that the object was under intelligent control. We just could not lose it. It was racing after us." Then suddenly, as they reached the railway between Kalwa and Sztum, as you see here, they saw this object directly ahead of them, apparently sitting on or just above the road. It appeared to be about 20 feet wide, overlapping each side of the road. They could see kind of curved stripes on its surface. The patient, Elsbeto, also saw it, but as she says, I didn't pay much attention to the thing. Let UFOs be UFOs. I thought my problem was how not to bear my baby in the ambulance. So with this object now blocking their forward progress, Dr. Piazza exited the ambulance and approached the crossing station's guards. Their names were Josefa Kaminska and Gabriela Ludorf. They were both leaning out of the window. The doctor asked them, "Can you see what I see?" And they replied, "We were looking at it for a while." So she radioed the police and told them that the roadway was blocked and could they please come. And the police asked, of course, what's blocking the road? And she answered, a UFO. So at this point, the object moved slightly up to the top of a small hill next to the road. Meanwhile, Elsbeto's labor pains were coming at much shorter intervals, and Dr. Barbara Piazza knew that they were running out of time. So she ordered the ambulance driver to flash the ambulance headlights at the object. He flashed twice, and immediately this object moved forward, became smaller, and vanished. It was now 4:15 a.m. They drove the remaining 10 minutes to the hospital, and just under 2 hours later, Elsbeto Pluta gave birth to her daughter Aneta. Now this case does have some skeptics and debunkers, because apparently there was a full moon or near full moon on this night, and they tried to explain away this sighting as the setting of the moon on the road in front of them, disregarding apparently the fact that this object was described as moving, pulsating at one point, showing curved bands on it, was blocking the road, had moved off, shrank, and disappeared in seconds. Nevertheless, some feel that the witnesses mistook the moon for a UFO. But perhaps I didn't know about this report from a gentleman who says that the day before the situation described above, I saw a similar ball over Rudlo near Brunwau. It was evening, but still very light. It could have been around 7 p.m. Together with my late father, we went fishing with the intention of catching eel. We stopped on the Pazlika River opposite the POM plant in Braniwau and started to unwind our rods, and at that time we saw an orange ball with 2 dark stripes in the sky. It was flying slowly from the southeast to the northwest. It is difficult for me to assess the size, distance from us, and speed of this object, but we observed the object for about 1 or 2 minutes until it disappeared behind the horizon. Later I read about the same object seen in the vicinity of Sztum. How cool is that? 2 people being taken on board and given all kinds of scientific information and more. And this second case with, the crew of an ambulance having a very, very close encounter with a UFO that blocked their path forward on the road. And I know there are those skeptics who say that no, what they saw was just the setting moon. To me, that makes me laugh because I just cannot imagine a medical doctor and an ambulance driver and the other medical worker being fooled by the setting moon in front of them on the road. And besides, the details don't match that whatsoever. They said this object was moving around. They watched it shrink and disappear instantly. I don't think this was the moon, despite what the debunkers say. But again, I wasn't there, neither were they. Only the witnesses truly know what happened. And that's true, of course, in this next case, which is perhaps one of Ukraine's most famous onboard UFO encounters. This one got quite a bit of publicity. I hadn't heard of it until I started researching this case. So interesting. This one I call We Won't Do You Any Harm. This occurred on January 12, 2008 in Dubno, Ukraine. This is such a fascinating case because the entire family saw the UFO prior to the husband and wife both being taken on board. It's a very extensive encounter containing almost all the elements we see when people are taken on board. Also super interesting is how they were affected physically, as we shall see. Very well investigated as well. This one is really hard to deny that something truly amazing happened to this Ukrainian couple. It was on January 12, 2008 that the Voronezhsky family of Dubno in the Dubno region of Ukraine experienced a really remarkable encounter. The family consisted of 34-year-old Vladimir, he's a martial arts instructor, a professional wrestler, and his 29-year-old wife Olga, and their 3 children, Vanessa, age 9, Angelica, age 8, and Arthur, who was 1 year old. At this time, Olga was suffering from chronic colitis, which was causing her pain in her stomach area. She'd had it for years. Now, on that day, Vanessa and Angelica had come home from a trip to the store and told their parents that they had seen, quote, a flying star. Their mother said they probably saw a satellite or a plane. The girls protested and said this object was actually flashing colored lights, and they insisted that their parents come outside and see it for themselves. So they did, and they saw this strange object high in the sky over the nearby river. They could see it moving and changing shapes. In fact, Olga took a picture of it on her cell phone. Then they went inside. But as Vladimir says, I saw what looked like 3 bullets hovering in the sky. I thought they were satellites. That evening, in the middle of the night, Vladimir was woken by a bright, white-violet light illuminating the interior of their house. He didn't think much of it and went back to sleep, but then Olga woke up and saw it too. So she woke up, Vladimir saying, get up, there's something glowing over the house. And their child Angelica saw it too. All 3 of them now saw that the ceiling of their bedroom had disappeared or had become completely transparent, and hovering directly over their house was this huge disc-shaped craft. So dressed only in their bedclothes, Vladimir and Olga ran outside, and as Olga says, there was something like a platform hanging 100 meters above the house. A white and purple light was streaming from it. We were so scared that we couldn't move. Both Olga and Vladimir found themselves immobilized. Olga said she felt herself being pulled upward, and Vladimir says he actually saw his wife rising up in a spiral motion towards the craft. He tried to catch her, but at the same time found himself suddenly inside this strange white room with his wife. He said this room was totally white with smooth, glass-like walls, and there were about a dozen short humanoids standing around them. He said that they had large heads, smooth gray skin, 3 fingers on each hand. They were wearing tight coveralls and what looked like face masks. The only thing he could really see were large black eyes. He did see one entity was about 6 feet tall, twice the height of the others. He said their legs looked really strange and they seemed to float around rather than walk. Immediately, Olga was put in a chair, which she said was similar to one seen in a gynecological office. Vladimir jumped up to protect his wife, but he says he hit, quote, an invisible wall. So concerned, he asked these figures, what's going on? And they replied telepathically, nothing terrible, soon you will be back home. And he said, I'm not satisfied with that. The ETs tried to approach him several times, but Vladimir, being a martial artist, used these techniques to keep them away. And speaking telepathically in a mixture, he says, of Ukrainian and Russian, they spoke to him, asking him why he was resisting. And as Vladimir says, the words sounded in my head. They looked me in the eye. They were not aggressive or irritated. So after lashing out at them several times, he says the ETs placed this sort of metallic device on his chest area and rendered him totally unable to move. They indicated a table and told Olga to lie down on it, and as Olga says, they were polite and addressed me as you. They asked how I felt and if it hurt. So she lay down on this table and she watched as these ETs mysteriously opened up a wide incision into her abdomen. She said she could see the inside of her body and actually smell it, and they began to poke around at various organs using this strange pincher-like instrument. And during this time, the figures spoke to her telepathically, calming her, asking her if she felt any pain. And they said, we wouldn't do you any harm, we just want to look. So Olga was struck by their polite bedside manner, and as she says, "I didn't feel any pain. I felt calm and relaxed. It was as if they were taking tests." They used these strange instruments, which Olga found impossible to accurately describe. Afterwards, they sewed up her stomach as mysteriously as they opened it. There was no trace, no scar of the incision. One of the ETs then spoke with Vladimir, telling him that their society was a collective and that each person had strictly defined social roles. They told him that they lived largely underground. Sometimes they communicated using images rather than words, so it was hard for him to understand some of this. Vladimir says that he was also examined with a rod-like device, which he says the ETs seemed to insert into his head, though this did not cause him any pain. The ETs told him that Olga's procedure has to be done, and they apologized for the, quote, medical suffering, and promised them an excursion, a voyage, as compensation for this. At this point, they placed both he and Olga in a smaller craft with a transparent top. This left the mothership, and Vladimir and Olga were amazed to see stars and a strange foreign planet below them. Vladimir asked them how they were able to travel so quickly through space, and the ETs said that they did not exceed the speed of light, but instead were able to tear space. Vladimir was unable to fully understand all of this. One of the ETs said that Vladimir now knew too much and that they could not return him. This made him very angry, and he said he was not afraid of them, and this seemed to make the ETs act in a much more respectful manner. The ETs also told Vladimir that they were very interested in humans because of their emotions, and as Vladimir says, "We are interesting to them because we have feelings, fear, anger, love, joy. The aliens don't have that." At one point, they tried to persuade Vladimir to procreate with one of their females. He refused because this female ET was not attractive to him. She had a bald head and, he says, looked ugly. At this point, the ET changed its appearance into that of a beautiful woman. Vladimir felt like they had read his mind and were portraying his idea of an ideal woman. And he did find himself attracted to her and began to move forward with this. But now, however, Olga saw this and protested. The ET seemed confused and asked her why, and she had to explain to them about her feelings of jealousy. The ETs were surprised at this and asked them how they survived with such emotions. So they told him all kinds of things, that there was a war going on in space. Vladimir asked about death, and they said that it did not exist, that it was misunderstood, and that it was just a transition into a different form of existence. They talked about God. They said that there were people on our planet against God and were trying to cover up information, and that the Earth would soon be destroyed. At some point, Vladimir and Olga looked outside and could see the craft moving back towards Earth. They said they were put on a smaller craft which went down and hovered above their home, and they were both deposited back into their beds via a beam of light. They woke up the next morning with headaches. Both had conscious recall of the experience, but it was dreamlike, and they wondered if they were going crazy. And at first they didn't talk about it, but later Olga did start talking about this, quote, strange alien dream she had, and Vladimir was shocked because he recalled the exact same details as his wife, and both realized that this was not a dream at all, it was real. In February 2008, Vladimir met with researcher Yuri Stepanov, who regressed them, and Vladimir was able to recall some further details about the appearance of the craft and how it is able to become invisible by surrounding itself with a layer of plasma. And Yuri was absolutely convinced of the case and said Vladimir is telling the truth. And there's good evidence that this did happen, because most incredible were the physiological effects which resulted from this encounter. Vladimir's hair, which was going gray, started to turn black again, and he said his physical powers of endurance increased greatly. As he says, "It is easier for me to perform complex jumps and turns. I do not stretch my muscles. My skin has become much tougher." Olga was also physically affected. She was completely cured of her chronic colitis, and she also acquired a very unique and strange ability. She says that by just placing the palm of her hand against her own forehead or the forehead of somebody else for about 2 or 3 minutes, she could make a drunken person completely sober. The couple did eventually go public, appearing on a TV show, and they were soon ridiculed by neighbors and other skeptics, but they stuck to their stories. They did say that the ETs told them they would return in 2 years, but whether or not this occurred has not been revealed. When Vladimir went on TV, this was in 2012, he did subject himself to a lie detector test, which he passed with flying colors. He was telling the truth according to this lie detector test. Absolutely astonishing. I mean, both the husband and wife being affected physically in so many different ways, him becoming stronger, his gray hair turning brown again, she being cured of colitis that she had been suffering from for years, and gaining other really amazing psychic abilities. These are patterns we see in a number of these cases. But how interesting, being given a tour of the craft, beyond that as well. And him passing a lie detector test. I think it's a really important case. I think all of these are. These, again, are the kinds of cases that really have so much information, have so much to teach us about who's out there beyond Earth. These cases, I think, teach us so much about science. I mean, they have the potential to really advance our knowledge on so many fronts. That's, I think, why these cases are so important and really should be taken seriously. To me, onboard UFO encounters represent the cutting edge of UFO research. And I would just wish more attention would be paid towards them and that they were taken more seriously and that the skeptics and debunkers would just at least take a look at the evidence. Because often they don't. They will not even consider that these cases might be valid. But to me, there are so many that alone is the best evidence of this. It's not just 1 or 2 people reporting this, or 10 or 20 or 100. It's thousands upon thousands. And there are indications that these kinds of cases number in the millions. So there you go. 5 really extensive cases coming from all over the world, from people who don't know each other, and yet are reporting remarkably similar details. So thank you once again for watching. I hope you enjoyed this episode, perhaps learned something. There's a lot more cases like this. This is an important subject. I think it has the potential to change all of humanity and really bring us together. Thank you again. I really appreciate it. And until next time, keep asking those hard questions. Keep searching for the truth. Most important of all, keep having fun. I will see you next Friday. Bye for now.